Hi guys, it's Blackie. Okay, here lately I've been noticing in a lot of videos, a lot of different people's videos, of having a oil lamp as part of their kit to take to camp for a primitive camp. And so they're coming out and they're setting up their rucksack and they're setting up their stuff, and they bring out their tarp and they put it up, or their little lavaloo or whatever, and then they will bring out this kerosene oil lantern, one of the small ones, sometimes even the big ones, and hang it up in camp to illuminate the camp. Now, I'm a big fan of some sort of illumination in a camp. It keeps you from making little accidents and tripping over things so much, and it's usually a good idea. I, however, am not a big fan of the kerosene lantern for carrying. If you've got conveyance, yes. Let me clarify that a minute. Now, my background is I grew up poor, and I had family members in the 1970s that still did not have electricity. They lived on farms in the middle of nowhere, and they did not have electricity in the house. And many of them didn't have electricity anywhere on the property. You know, so a lot of times you'd have the house didn't have power, but the barn did because of machinery that had to be run. You know, like battery chargers and stuff like that, or tools. But the actual house didn't, because they had grew up without it. And so kerosene lanterns and storm lanterns I saw a lot, and everybody that I knew had one for storms down here in the south. When hurricanes would knock out the power grid for a week or 10 days or something like that, they just immediately fall back to old kerosene lanterns. And so it was something I saw a lot as a child, and as I used a lot for night fishing and stuff. We'd carry a lantern. I'd carry those type of kerosene lanterns, and we'd hunt with them. And what you'd do is you'd take a bucket or a stool, and you'd find you a nice big broad tree that's going to be, this is going to be my deer stand right here. We're doing a deer drive, okay? And I would sit down on the bucket, and I would put that lantern lit between my feet. And then I would take a blanket, an old army blanket or something, and put behind me, sit down and drape the blanket over me, so it did like this, and just your head was sticking out. Well, the fumes and the heat from that kerosene lantern would fill up the inside of that blanket and make very warm. And so it was a heater, basically. And I would sit there, and and I knew guys that even on top of the lantern, they had like an old coffee can or something. They'd sit down over the top, and on top of that, they'd put a thing of coffee or something to keep coffee warm and stuff like that on really cold days. So there was a lot of uses for them old lanterns. But you've got to understand, those lanterns are not sealed up. The base of the lantern is basically an open pot. The wick that you see on top isn't sealed. It is literally usually like a little thin piece of tin with two little tabs, and it sits down there and rotates and locks the tabs. The top of the pot is 1.5 inch or 2 inch circle, wide open down to the fuel. So if you tip that lantern over, fuel just pours out of it. Often it pours out of it right next to a burning wick. So if the lantern's lit and it gets knocked over, it can start a major fire. Especially inside of a nylon tent, that would be very, very bad. Liquid burning fluid running can cause all kinds of problems in a short amount of time. And so, yes, for conveyance, I'm carrying it in a canoe, I'm carrying it in a vehicle getting there, or I've got it inside of something, carrying it on a bicycle or something, or a motorcycle. Yeah, drain all the fuel out of it back into the thing best you can, and then just put it inside of a dry bag or something, so if it does, any liquid sloshes out, it ain't gonna get all over everything. Yeah, you can carry them that way fairly effectively. But for me, as far as carrying them as a camp light for bushcraft, it's kind of a little overkill, and it's kind of a fire hazard. I am more of the old candle type guy, and as many of you know, I did 25 years of living history, and candles was what you had. And so candle lanterns were the way to light a living history rendezvous event. And so I have extensive use of various candle lanterns for lighting a camp at night. And I actually prefer those over to the oil lamps for a couple of reasons. But the most pressing of which is the idea that once the candle is extinguished and cooled down and the wax is hardened, it's not a fire hazard. You can stick it in your gear, it can turn it upside down, etc. It's fine. And let's just go ahead and address what's going to be the most obvious. Those little UCO lanterns where the top slides up and you've got the candle in it. A beeswax candle will burn 12, 14 hours in those things and work very well. I know guys that will take them and put them inside of their tent, and that's something that I learned in cold weather, was taking a small lamp like that, a little candle lantern or whatever, and putting it inside of a sealed up tent. It does not consume enough oxygen to be any problem, but most importantly, it keeps the chill factor down. It is not truly a heater as it keeps the humidity down. Your breath doesn't do as much condensation if there's a burning candle lantern in there. And we found that was ways to keep little small canvas tents and things warmer against the cold in the dead of winter. So those small UCO, I call them, lanterns are a good way to go. Now, the Stonebridge lantern. And I recently found one of these at a curio shop. When I was a boy, the small town about 15 miles from my home called Pinkard, Alabama, had a place that had been a cotton mill back in the 1930s. It got closed down, and they had reactivated it during World War II as a place to manufacture something for the war effort. And then when the war was over, the owner of that property bought up a lot of military surplus that was coming out of all these bases, and guys were getting out and etc. So he bought up the wool uniforms, he bought up whatever, and put it in there and sold it as a military surplus store. And so whenever I found it in the early 1970s, it had been in operation for 20 plus years then. You know, or, yeah, about 1951 is when it opened up. And so here it is, you know, 1970s, it was 20 plus years, it had been a surplus store. And I spent many hours in that place walking around, and there was virtually anything that you could find. There was just World War I, World War II, and whatever. I found McClellan saddles from the Civil War. I found it was anything that had been in military stockpiles that between the wars, before the wars, and after World War II, when they were wholesale dumping it, getting rid of it, and closing down a lot of these small camps and bases and stuff like that. These surplus places were buying it up. And so they did. And for many, many years, hanging up in the back, when you walk back there where all the surplus was one of these Stockbridge lanterns. And I didn't know what I was looking at back then. I do today. But it's a little folding brass lantern that you open up. And this was originally 1906. The military used these. And you could open them up. The bottom fell down. It folded up, see. Fell down, and there's a little place down there for a candle to go. And then you laid the top down carefully to put the sides in where they go, like that. And then the top came up, and this hook right here locked downhill into the loop. Just a second. You don't have to. This one's brand new and it's stiff. Come on, baby. Come on. There we go. One small folding candle lantern. Now you would unhook here, light the candle, and fold this back. It had a hole in the back for a wall sconce so you could hang it on a nail. It had a bail for carrying it. And this was where the air came out, and there's the big opening where the top of the flame was. So you could hold it and carry it, and these three sides were actually a thin, early plastic-like material. As long as you didn't put the raw flame against it, it wouldn't burn. And there's plenty of air holes all the way around it. Now that old one that was hung in up on the wall in there, on the back of it, had been scratched in the names of these officers that apparently had been in some sort of officers' quarters on Fort Benning. and it was like 1909, such and such, 1912, da, 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 and those were officers that had been in that quarters they had probably for a backup light, or maybe it had been originally the light, who knows. But each one had signed. The last one was 1944, was a captain that said 1944, and those were guys in that barracks, okay, officers' quarters. I wish I had that lantern. This one is just a modern reproduction, but how I wish I had that lantern. But back to the topic. Taking this and putting a candle in it. Now you get one of those beeswax. Why beeswax, Blackie? Beeswax is the densest of the waxes that we make candles out of, and if you will take your beeswax candles, here's a tip of trick, and put them in the freezer, say a day or two before you're going to go, it makes the wax even denser. And so you bring it out, let it thaw out naturally, so to speak, and then whenever you light it up, it'll actually burn a little longer because you made the molecules a little tighter by putting it in the freezer. So you can get a full night out of one candle, because let's face it, you're going to come out here and about sundown. In the summertime, sundown's about 8:30 here in my Alabama, and so you're going to have like less than 12 hours of darkness, more like 8 or 10 hours of darkness. And so one lantern burning 12 hours will go all night. If you want a night light, that's the way to go. Again, it folds up flat, slides into the gear, and etc. Those little Ukios are even more compact and easy. But I would recommend the candle lantern over the oil lamp. Yeah, the oil lamp looks cool. Got you, baby. I'm the same way. I think it's picturesque and it's very awesome. And at some point I'm going to do a how to use an oil lamp video where I'm going to talk about those tricks about how to use it as a cooking stove, how to heat coffee on it, how to use it as a heater, how to use it as a tent heater, all kinds of stuff we learned using them when I was coming up. I'll do that probably this winter when it cools off a little bit. But in the meantime, the thing I want you to take away from this is the fact that it's safer to carry candles than it is to carry those oil lamps. Yes, they're more picturesque, but if they fall over, you may have a problem in a hurry. And if a lit candle falls over, usually it'll just keep burning like it is. And a lit candle inside of something like this doesn't have a lot to set afire. See? And so you get a reaction time. Burning oil is a bigger threat. Plus carrying the oil inside of a pack or whatever to refuel that lantern. If it gets loose, open or whatever, it's going to saturate everything in that pack. And then you've got another problem. Now, any food that's been contaminated cannot be eaten, etc. So now you've got a food problem, you've got a pack problem, your sleeping bag's wet with it, you got all kinds of cleaning. A candle doesn't give you any of those problems. And the worst, and that's the reason I recommend a beeswax candle. Paraffin candles can actually get in a pack hot enough to kind of melt. Beeswax doesn't, because it has a much higher, it's like 400 something degrees to make it melt. So a 165 degree sitting in the blazing sunlight in a sealed up whatever is not hot enough. A paraffin candle will get hot enough, it'll bend. Beeswax won't. So, wisdom for today, if you're wanting to use a aesthetic, we'll call it, light in camp, I recommend a beeswax candle and a candle lantern of some kind. These are kind of heavy comparatively, but them Ukios are nice and light. So if you're wanting that, I recommend that. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Please leave any questions or comments below. And until next time, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.